Hello and welcome to CMC. Thanks, Jay. I'm Kermit Whitfield, a member of the CMC's Board of Trustees and Director of Communications at United Way of Central Ohio, and it's great to see everyone here today. We got a packed house. Today, the Columbus Metropolitan Club presents Smart Cities Improve Lives, sponsored by BDO, Columbus Regional Airport Authority, CODA, AT&T, Honda, and Battelle. Each of our sponsors are represented by many of their friends and associates. Let's take a moment to thank them. Now, please help me welcome Michael Voinovich, a fellow CMC board member and Assurance Office Managing Partner at BDO, to introduce our forum and speakers.
Thanks, Kermit. I'm Mike Voinovich of BDO. We're a global accounting and consulting firm. Happy to be here today. BDO is proud to support the mission of the Columbus Metropolitan Club, which we convene weekly at town hall forums just like this to discuss important topics that face this community. We have been hearing so much ado about smart cities. Clearly, this is a win for Columbus. Who doesn't want to live in a smart city, right? The harder part now is actually explaining and articulating what this truly means to be a smart city, including the impact on the local economy and what we should all expect to see as residents, which is why we have asked these smart people to come and visit with us today. So won't you please help me welcome them, and you can hold your applause to the end. Chief Innovation Officer for the City of Columbus, Michael Stevens, President and CEO of Workforce Development Board of Central Ohio, Lisa Patt-McDaniel, Chief Operating Officer of TRC Inc., Joanna Pinkerton, and the Mani Haluja Endowed Dean's Chair, Executive Dean of Professional Colleges and Dean of College of Engineering at OSU, and our host today, David Williams.
Thank you, Mike. I'm looking forward to the conversation this afternoon. As you know, it's over a year now since the Department of Transportation and Paul Allen's Vulcan Foundation gave $50 million to Columbus as the winner of the competition amongst 77 mid-sized cities across the nation to be declared the Smart City. I'm delighted to be the dean of the smartest college in the smartest university in the smartest city in the nation. We intend to run the experiments to ensure that this is a success. And from my standpoint, the academic standpoint, I see the Smart City, Smart Columbus, as an opportunity for us to test the technologies and to work with the people whom we are trying to improve the lives of, to ensure that we put the best programs in place that can be replicated across the nation to transform the way that we move people around in this coming century. So from an engineering standpoint, this involves developing technology, it involves running experiments, it involves failing and failing grandly. And so I want to put out the idea that we are running an extraordinary experiment, and sometimes we learn more from the failures of our experiments than from the success. So I hope that we are indeed successful in this program over the next several years, and understand that not everything will work because it shouldn't. So I see this as just a grand engineering experiment, and that is my view of Smart City and Smart Columbus, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what works and what doesn't. We have assembled an extraordinarily diverse panel here, and they will have their own views of what a smart city and smart Columbus means. So let me ask the panel to give you their thoughts on exactly what a smart city and smart Columbus means to them. Joanna.
Thank you, Dave. And I'm so glad that you referenced how we're going to move people in the coming century. We've been moving people around the same way for almost a century to date. Everything we do, how we got here, how we move, and how our economy moves is based on the ability to move yourself around, largely based on four wheels and a steering wheel. As Chief Operating Officer at the Transportation Research Center, if I were willing to break my non-disclosure agreements, I could tell you about all kinds of cool technologies that already exist. They're on the shelves, they're being tested and deployed in a contained, safe environment at TRC today. And that's part of why the U.S. Department of Transportation recognized this region and this city as a place to continue that growth. And then let's get it outside of the safe, confined fences of TRC, and let's put it out there and let people actually use it and benefit from it. I live in a very rural community south of Columbus, where people have an average of a 90-minute to 2-hour commute to work, and the average household spends up to 30% of their disposable income on driving to work. So for me, smart cities is about finding ways for people to move efficiently and effectively so that they can spend their money on other things. And I'm really excited that this urban metropolis here in Central Ohio has been chosen, because if it works in Ohio, it can be deployed in other places around the nation and also the globe. So for me, a smart city is reducing the cost of infrastructure and public service, and improving the level of service that we deliver to our citizens in all neighborhoods, rural and urban.
Hard to build on that. So here's what I think. I think that smart cities and the initiatives around this effort show great promise, but great promise is only realized in thoughtful implementation and considering everybody in our community. So I think the great promise of this is a lot about what you're saying in the rural areas, but also in our neighborhoods and our communities where we have people who don't have access right now to places where there are jobs. So I think that one of the things is being able to have access through the efficient use of transportation and the technology that this will bring will allow us to help those people who need access to jobs get it. On the other hand, so as workforce, I'm concerned about all of our workforce. On the other end, people who already have lots of talent and skills, and where we have employers who need those skills, I think this is going to be a cool factor, obviously. It's going to attract people with those talents and skills here, so that we can all prosper from their knowledge and the skill that they bring. So I know we've heard a lot about millennials. Yes, it'll attract the millennials. It'll attract me. I'm an X-Gen. Don't do the math. But yeah, don't do the math, Mike. But also the I-Gen, those who are behind the millennials, who know nothing more than, they've always lived with the iPad. It's the 5-year-old who can take your smartphone and work it for you when you don't know what you're doing. You know, that's a future talent pipeline that we need to keep here. So I think that is something that if we're thoughtfully implementing this, we'll be thinking ahead. And I'm hoping we don't have a lot of failure. I'm counting on a lot of success for this. And then thirdly, I know I'm here representing workforce, but I also have a background in development. And so the opportunity to redevelop communities and neighborhoods, as I said, that haven't had access to a lot of economic prosperity, I think will improve highly by our ability to move people around and our ability to have people live where they want to live, because they can have access to other places easily, cheaply, quickly. So those are the things that I think I'm really looking forward to, because I do believe we're going to see a lot of success in this.
Mike?
Wow.
Yeah,
That's tough to follow. I wish I brought my 40-slide presentation with all the technical details. Not that I'd be able to explain it to you. For me, what brought me back to Columbus in March and the idea about the smart city and the efforts that we're doing at Smart Columbus was the partnerships we have. I get to go to work every day, and I'm working with the Columbus Partnership and the private sector leadership, as well as CODA, AEP has made a significant contribution to what we're trying to accomplish. Battelle has been a significant partner through the application process to what we're trying to do now in delivering on the grant application. Obviously, the Ohio State University is critical to what we're doing and the discussions that we're having to make sure that we're forward-thinking and we're delivering on what possibilities technically we can do on an intelligent transportation system. I look at the work that MORPS's done to lay the groundwork in identifying that by 2050, we're going to have 1 million more residents in this region. That's critical. I look at what's going on in the smart corridor up in Route 33 between Dublin and Marysville up to the TRC. But the fact that we're able to work together and share best practices and talk about what's important beyond just the intelligent transportation system, but how it's going to have an impact on our neighborhoods. And Mayor Ginther likes to talk about how mobility is the great equalizer. So how do we take mobility and make it that great equalizer? Joanna talked about how the amount of money certain folks are paying just to get around. How do we make sure that we're providing solutions? And this is where COTA is a phenomenal partner, because they're looking at the transit system, whether it's the next generation plan or the new system that they've just rolled out. They're really working on how do we provide a solution to our community that moves people around effectively and efficiently. So those, like, I can go on and on about a smart city. I've been kind of inundated in the last 5 months of what it is, but to me, that's the partnerships that we have, what we call the Columbus Way, that's been critical.
Thank you, Mike. I'd like to pick up on the idea of 1 million more people in this area within the lifetimes of most of us. And that is a tremendous opportunity, but also raises the question about jobs and the spectrum of jobs that will be facilitated by Smart City. We in the higher education field view ourselves as the providers of the workforce over a whole range of different areas. So we're excited about opportunities for our students. But Lisa, if you could pick up the idea of workforce development in more depth and the spectrum of jobs that you see coming through this opportunity.
So many of you probably have already heard this idea. I don't want to take credit for this idea, but I think it's going to be really important. I bet everybody in this room is living, probably, most people are living off their cell phone. Your cell phone has got your schedule, it's got your connection to your email, it's got, your favorite apps that are managing your life for you. But how many of us really understand how it delivers us that information? I'm guessing most of us do not know how to code. Okay, except for Joey. She does. That's her job. But most of us probably do not understand what's behind that. And the jobs that are going to be related to the implementation of the technology are going to require a lot more knowledge. And I would assert, and this has been asserted before here in this region, that we need to start thinking about coding as a second language in school. And there's access to coding online that you can learn it. I keep saying I'm going to do that, and when I have 5 minutes, I'll start. And here's my concern about that too, though, that those of us who are in disadvantaged areas and where we already have a skills gap, oh my gosh, we add that kind of knowledge, and that skills gap widens incredibly. And so we have to start thinking now about kids who are in all of our schools in the whole region, not just the city, certainly the city, but the whole region. And we need to start addressing that now so we don't have young adults coming into the workforce with that skills gap, not knowing the basics of how technology works, how it programs, basic things which by then, a cell phone is as common to you as, your fork and spoon in the morning, to all the other things that are going to be built on top of the technology. Because what gets developed through this, right, through transportation, will have transferable effects to other things, because that's how it's worked. And if you think about how fast Technology has, what you were doing in 1987 with your desktop to what you're carrying around in your hand or your purse, that's only going to happen so much faster. And so our workforce has to be prepared and understand how that works. Everybody's afraid that robots are going to take over our jobs. Robots and automation, that's going to happen, and it should improve our quality of life. But there'll be other jobs that we haven't even thought of yet, but they're probably going to be technology-based in some way, shape, or form. So I would say that this is going to have, there's, like I said, great promise, but only fulfilled with thoughtful implementation. That's going to be my new mantra.
So, Lisa, I'm glad that you brought that up, and I agree with everything you said. And I'm going to take a theme of Mike's about partnership, and I'm going to challenge everyone in this room to think about how they interact with the educational system. If you don't interact through having a child in the system, you certainly went through a system at some point, or you pay taxes to a system. And the partnerships of people understanding the importance of what Lisa just said is what will make the difference. I dropped my middle schooler off to orientation last night. He's really excited to go into middle school for the first year. And I live, again, in a very rural community, and we don't have access to large sources of funding, and we don't have industry in our community. But yet I watched his eyes get this big as the new coding lab was introduced to him. I helped write a grant for our local school system. We were awarded a very small amount of dollars, opened a coding lab, so when you go into 6th grade, you will be doing coding. And then Google found out about a week ago and doubled the amount of money coming into our school just in random location, Ohio, and said, we want that class to be twice as large. And immediately I thought, why aren't all of the students taking this class just like they have to take language arts and learn grammar? Because they may need this to figure out how to troubleshoot their vehicle or how to get on the Hyperloop when they are 19 years old. So that didn't happen because we have whole-scale policy changes yet. Those are down the road a ways once we figure out the technology and what policies to change. But I think everyone in this room can partner with someone they know and begin to influence the fact that we should all be bilingual, even if one of them is in a language. I can code, I still don't understand it. I seriously just took those classes so I could understand what my employees were saying. But I guess now it's recorded, so they're going to find out.
So let me build on the theme of partnerships that you're hearing about. Mike, you introduced a few of the key partners that are in this room. Could you give us a more in-depth sense of the partnership that we put together to make this a successful application?
Well, it's multiple levels of partnership. It starts with U.S. Department of Transportation and Vulcan, which is the Paul Allen Family Foundation that provided grant dollars. And building upon that, the Columbus Partnership, as part of the application process, said, hey, we can take that $50 million and we can add $90 million upon that. And so this is how 50 becomes 140. And since we've won, that number, that acceleration fund, and really that's about taking dollars above and beyond the grant and making sure we're investing into this project so beyond 2020, when the grant period ends, we have a sustainable smart city initiative that's looking beyond just the intelligent transportation systems. What other impacts is it having on our community? And that number's come close to $500 million now. So it's significant investment, and that's really important. USDOT brought partners to the table, so we've been fortunate enough to work with AT&T. We've been working with Continental. We've brought actually Peloton. So there are partners more at the national level that the federal government brought to us, but then at the local level, the local businesses that have stepped up and have been engaged has been incredible. You know, we all recognize the significant impact that Honda plays in this region, and they are, I think, enthusiastic is I don't know if I'm NDAs or I don't want to put you on the spot, but they're enthusiastic about the work that's going on and how they can help us shape that work and learn from it. So those are really key and critical partnerships.
So far, we've only talked about the smart city. That's half the title. The other half is improving lives. So I'd like to ask our panel how they see the application of this technology, the partnerships, the implementation of solutions to the problems we face can improve the lives of all of us in this city. Joanna.
I would say through seamless integration. Imagine if you had to pay a separate bill for your texting, a separate bill for your data, a separate bill for your cell phone, and a separate a bill for the carrier who does all that for you. We wouldn't tolerate that. But mobility as a service is a relatively new concept. And that is the concept of where we're moving to, which is I wouldn't pay for a car or a bus or a plane or a bike. I want to go from A to B, and I want there to be an integrated system that gets me there. And if you think that that sounds like sci-fi, think about the millennials and the, what did you call them?
The I generation.
Okay, I'm glad
I
I
heard
don't
that
have any
the other
iGens.
day,
Okay.
yeah.
Mine are all millennials. So the millennials being one of the largest populations in the United States, but what's the other large population in the United States? The boomers. First generation with disposable income. They're forcing our systems to be used in a manner we never anticipated. Interstates are for travel and for vacation and for being retired for 20 years now. But what happens when you have to take their keys away? And if you've ever been through that before, it is a very, very difficult process because the quality of life of everyone involved declines significantly. So think about if I didn't have to worry about getting a parent to a doctor's office, or in a community that has a largely retired population, churches wouldn't have to shut down, groceries don't feel the impact because personal mobility devices that are available on demand keep you moving. You can tap an app to get a vehicle to you now, but what if you tap that app and whatever you needed for your body got you to where you needed to be? I think that's the impact on people's lives. So there won't be people who think, I can't get there because I live in the wrong neighborhood, or I can't get there because I'm in a wheelchair, or I can't get there because I'm no longer allowed to drive. They'll just say, I'm going to get there, and the system works for me.
I mean, the great thing about that, too, and I've talked from the individual's perspective, but also from employers' perspective, you know, if I'm living in the hilltop and I want to work in Gahanna, you know, right now, because there's a job I really want there, and if there's an employer who says, wow, you know, we need people with X, and we know there's people with X over here, they'll be able to get there. And it won't be, you know, 3 hours on a bus or having to pay a taxi, or even, you know, Uber's not that cheap if you're going that far. But we'll be able to, this integrated system will mean that people can have aspirations and fulfill them and remain where they're living. I mean, to me, that's a great, you know, I live in Dublin, I get to work downtown, I've always worked around downtown, love that. I can do that because I've got the income, I've got the Honda car, I've got, you know, I have the ability to do that, and I have the skills for the job I have, but lots of people don't. And so those aspirations about the kinds of jobs they might want are in the region, but still not accessible to them. And so it's again, it's what you've already said, the improvement for those people to get to those jobs, but also, again, for employers, it widens their pool of people that they can access to the whole region truly, as opposed to a certain slice of the region who can travel that far. And the other thing, too, is, I mean, along what you're saying about people like boomers, seniors, but just pretty much anybody who may not have access to proper health care, to good schools, to healthy food. You know, all of this integrated transportation system now opens all that up, and that improves quality of life just in innumerable ways that many of us may not even think of on a day-to-day basis.
Well, that was my next talking point. That was really good. I really like that.
I like stealing all your talking points.
No, that's
Mike.
good. That's good. I think we're in a moment of time where there's going to be technology is going to create such a huge disruption in the mobility space or an automotive, and how that impacts the jobs that are going to be available it's really interesting. And I'm not sure what jobs that we need to start training people for, and our workforce solution providers who are doing the training, I mean, I think the coding as a language is a good foundation, but beyond that, what else do we need to start focusing on, making sure we're ahead of it so we continue to provide a talent pipeline at, not only high-level, high-skilled folks, but entry-level, middle skill, and that's going to be really critical, and why we need the private sector's engagement to come and as the Internet of Things further develops and jobs and companies result from that, what do they need us developing and training for?
Well, let me just say that, and this is probably if my other workforce director colleagues across the state were in here, and some of our education partners will cringe maybe when I say this, but I'll say it anyways. So here's the thing. I think that regardless of what those jobs are that we do not know, let's just focus on coding as a minute. Coding teaches you critical thinking, logic, problem solving, thinking ahead, all of those, regardless of what jobs get invented in the future, if I can do all those things, I'll be able to figure out how to do that job. And so, I think that if we educate ourselves, because it's lifelong learning, it's not just children, we all have to be in the business of lifelong learning. But if we're learning those skills, we should be able to do almost any job that gets presented to us. It's not true in every case, but that's my philosophy.
And back to what you said about making sure you have access to health care and child care,
Right.
even if you have those skills. And that's where, we
Yeah.
talk about ladders of opportunities as being part of Smart Columbus. You need to be able, you need to keep your health and get quality health care to attend your job. You
Right.
need to be able to find child care. You need to be able to eat healthy to be productive and that end goal of the job. So there's a lot in our neighborhoods that we're working for to make sure that those, because when we put the application together as part of the Smart City Challenge, what differentiated Columbus was the fact that besides the solutions to the intelligent transportation system that we can deliver on, it's what happens because we have improved mobility, and how do we improve our neighborhoods and provide those ladders of opportunity. So that's so critical.
This award has brought extraordinary visibility to Columbus. At the university, we've received many accolades from around the nation, except for UT Austin that said, wait a minute, we're the smart city. So get over it. Right? I would like to let you know that within Ohio State, Carla Balo, our AVP for Mobility Research Business Development, former VP Research at Nissan, has been leading our contribution to the Smart City effort. She's on a plane to Calgary. She was in Barcelona a couple of weeks ago. She is visiting the smart cities of the world, taking Columbus there because they are asking us to show up. I would like to ask the panel to tell us more about their relationships, their partnerships, and the visibility they're getting outside of the Central Ohio region. Joanna.
Well, a little known fact about Ohio State and TRC is we have partnerships with more than 1,000 companies right now. Every automaker in the world, with the exception of 2 in China, are doing work at TRC or with Ohio State labs and students and faculty. So that was always a steady state thing. That work is there and you can rely on it. And in the last 24 months, as we have begun to talk more openly about the fact that we can research, test, develop, and now deploy these solutions, the increase, I see someone in the audience, I know I owe you a flyer, because a company has said, well, we've already done all of these things with Ohio State, but how can we get into this space? So them coming to Ohio, opening up new mobile labs, We have buildings that we're constructing as part of a capital campaign at TRC. I have one that's not even done, and I had to kick some of my staff out of it because I now have 3 people who want to lease that space from that state up north. So them coming here and bringing their skill sets and spinning out labs is a big impact that we're seeing. But my background is infrastructure, and I've not yet seen county engineers, city engineers, departments of transportation, and the people responsible for some of the most expensive assets in our nation come together and talk about, wow, could this fix the problem I have, which is not enough revenue and too much to do? If the cars are not creating accidents, do I need guardrail? If people are moving together in crowdsourced platoons, do I need a rural transit system, or do I hook their vehicles or their bicycles together? How do I use operational systems to fix a lot of my infrastructure? Can cars platoon off of buses if they're all heading to the airport? There are so many options that we don't know about yet, but yet people that I've never seen work together before, especially in the infrastructure side, really get it, and they're all coming together pretty much in a bipartisan way, which is really unusual to work on these solutions together.
So outside of the region, we have joined an organization called the Midwest Urban Strategies Association, and what it is, it's other workforce boards in the Midwest of the Federal Department of Labor Region 5, if you even know what that means. But essentially it's Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, Indianapolis, Chicago, Detroit, St. Louis, Kansas City, basically Milwaukee, 13 or 14 cities who are more urban to talk about workforce issues. So I went to Milwaukee because we announced our agreement to join together and form this organization. And the gentleman from St. Louis did ask me about the Smart Cities Initiative and what it was. And we had started to have this conversation with a few of us about what would that mean? Do we even have a role in it? And so I had to explain to them what I thought our role was going to be in it. So we're getting interest slowly, but I was surprised actually that he asked me about it because I wasn't sure, you know, in my space how many people really pay attention to that kind of thing. But I think, though, so it came out that perhaps when we get together, I could talk a little bit more about it to the whole group as kind of in a presentation. And because they're very intrigued to see how we are going to operate within the space. So people are looking at us, even people that I didn't know would be looking at us. So I guess I throw that out there.
We get a lot of requests to talk to a lot of different people. There's a lot of interest in what we're doing. And we've got to balance out, you know, telling that story and continuing the momentum that we've gained from winning the Smart Cities Challenge with delivering on what we said we're going to do in the demonstration projects. But we got to keep telling the story, even as have done a lot of internal technical work to really develop the concept of operations and move to those system requirements that we want to do for the projects. Because, like I said, beyond the grant period of 2020, the Smart Columbus initiative is going to be critical to the success of our region. So we are trying to balance the demand for our time with telling the story, as well as making sure we're delivering on what we said we would do. I get asked a lot of, what are we going to see? I mean, it's been over a year since it's announced. We've been finishing up the first year of the cooperative agreement of USDOT. And I'd like to tell folks is what you're going to see over the next 3 to 6 months is around our electrification efforts. AEP has been on the lead with that. They are really working on what can they do to modernize the grid, electric charging stations, renewable energy. We're working with the Columbus Partnership to make sure that we're encouraging consumer adoption around electric vehicles. And they have put together a great plan to go out and encourage that adoption through different ride and drive events. So keep on a lookout for that. We hope you can participate in those as well. Sorry, I kind of hijacked it with my commercial there, but I appreciate it.
Perfectly all right. We will move to audience questions in just a few minutes, so please get ready, line up behind the The microphone over there, we'll bring the whips out if you don't. We expect you to now engage us in conversation. And while you're bringing your questions to the microphone, let me just ask the panel for one last short thought. We have an extraordinary audience here from right across the community. If you wanted them to take away one thought to distribute to your friends and family and colleagues, what would that be? No pressure.
Yeah.
We are going to a connected vehicle environment that's going to be autonomous, there's going to be a lot more sharing, and it's going to be electric. So if you think about it, the acronym CASE, that is really important, and start thinking about how are you going to be engaged in changing the way we move around this city beyond just being one of the 87% of the folks, and I'm one of them, who are single occupant in a vehicle that's going to work. I mean, that's a big thing that you think about how you can change your behavior around that. And you know, I'm trying to do that myself. I rode the 73 back and forth from Dublin to downtown twice last week, and I'm trying to encourage that. So there's things you can do.
That was pretty meager applause. Let's see if you can do better, Lisa.
I think the one thing that I'd want everybody to take back is, I mean, we're talking about what we think is going to happen. That doesn't mean we know what is going to happen, right? And so it's in the collective impact of everybody in this room to start to think about how we can make use of what we've got and how we can improve the quality of life for everybody, not just a certain few. And I think in that collective thought process and collective brain power, I guess, is where we'll make the collective impact so that when we raise some boats, we lift all boats with this. And it's a great opportunity. And you can just repeat my mantra. Promise is great, but it's only realized in thoughtful implementation. And so we've all got to be part of that thoughtful implementation and who it affects and how it raises everybody. Yeah, nobody clap for me. I love it. That's okay.
Okay, you'll clap for me?
Joanna, yes.
Okay, I've got two guaranteed, well, one guaranteed clapper. I think Mike was writing, but I'll buy his vote right now. Mike is right.
Thank you.
And Lisa is accurate as far as implementation. So what we haven't talked about is the why. There will be naysayers in this room. There will be people who will say it's not going to happen. There will be people who, even though they think it's cool, will think it's scary to have so much disruptive change. Well, what is life? Life is changed. Adapting to that change is critical. And Lisa mentioned the cell phone. We didn't think we would have lives beyond a desktop. We didn't think we'd have lives beyond horse and buggy. We didn't think we'd have lives beyond cars. And the top 5 automakers in the world, when they talk to us, they say they are mobility companies because they are working on mobility as a service so that they can be in business for another 100 years. So if you think it's not going to happen, you need to listen to Mike. It will happen. It will happen at different degrees, but you need to learn how it can improve your life. So think about the why. We have the highest number of fatalities we've had in this nation in decades. We need to stop killing ourselves in cars. We have people who cannot access things because they don't have mobility. We need to change that paradigm. So we need safety, we need access, and we need to worry about our environment. We have people who've never smoked a day in their lives with lung cancer. So we have to reduce emissions. So the reasons these things are being done are being driven by very, very serious societal needs. Safety and economy and access. So get over the why and think about how it might impact you and find a way to convince yourself and your neighbors. I guess be advocates for this.
Thank you, Joanna. It is CMC's tradition to take audience questions, and thank you to those of you who've lined up over there. Please state your name, ask your question, and in consideration to everyone, please stick to questions rather than editorial comments. First question, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Kathy Fox with the Pizzuti Companies. And I wanted to follow up on something Joanna talked about with the seamless integration of technology and changing the idea of each individual mode of transportation and looking at it as a system. And I'm wondering if we can take that idea and apply it to workforce development. It is a bigger challenge, I think, but I think it's so critical because we have so many people working on different pieces and parts, but they don't appear to be an integrated system. So I'd like to hear some comments about that possibility.
While Lisa Patt-McDaniel thinks, because I think she's best to answer that question, I'd like to also respond with not only workforce development, but Medicare, Medicaid, so systems that operate because people have to move. So to even get to the doctor's appointment or to get to the training, the answer is yes. I think that will take a significant policy shift that you could probably speak to.
Yeah, well, and you know, one of the things I was sitting here thinking that I really didn't mention, I talked about jobs, but to get to the actual education and training places, right, where people currently can't even access that to gain skills, to get jobs, I think that all this integration of mobility, again, will help people access the services they need to get the skills that they need and then to find the job that fits those skills. So I also think, you know, it's the Workforce Development Board does not do or provide workforce services alone. We have partners, and our partners are all over the city, and some people don't even know they're our partners yet, but they will soon. So, you know, making it so that where I live doesn't determine what kind of training skills or assistance I can get is going to probably be a byproduct of an integrated transportation system, mobility system. I'm not sure if I'm getting at what it is you want to know, Kathy, but I mean.
I want to take it beyond transportation. Transportation's part of it, but as a system, our education and workforce development are not a system. They are in many ways separate pieces, and I don't know that we're looking at the outputs that we need in the future economy when we look at who's going to go to kindergarten and what are they going to learn and how are they going to get there.
Right, okay, so from that perspective, yes, we already, even as a board, are somewhat integrated. We have providers, we have Columbus State is on my board. We are wanting to work together and create kind of that net so that we're all leveraging our knowledge about what's going to be needed so that when we go back to starting in kindergarten, we don't want to be a remedial system. And in some ways, oftentimes we are. And so as a board, and I have members of my board over there, so they can stand up and say, no, if this isn't correct. But I think as a board, what we want to do is we want to pull all the pieces, education, meaning elementary school, and gosh, even childcare and pre-K, because a lot happens there before someone even gets into school. And then what happens once you graduate with the various ways you can graduate now from high school, what kind of post-secondary credentials should we be pushing people towards? You know, what is the skill gain? My whole movement with wanting people to learn coding in grade school, that's not something we provide directly. That's something we have to influence our partners to provide.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Kathy. Next question, please.
Fred Unedum, and many exciting prospects here. Lisa had touched upon this. My concern, though, in speaking about thoughtful, Mike had spoken just a bit about neighborhoods. And so my question is, what do the neighborhoods look like? Because it brings to mind from the 50s of the Robert Moses proposal to crisscross the 5 boroughs with the freeways Jane Jacobs had led the fight against. So but she was talking about the walkability, the inclusion of the neighborhoods, and so on. So with this transportation, what are our neighborhoods going to look like? Are we just passing by and passing through, or do they still have a strong focus within themselves?
What we should start seeing, if we do this right in a mobility approach, where the interstate highway system has been phenomenal for this country, but it also, in Columbus and across the country, ripped through neighborhoods and separated neighborhoods. It should start to kind of bridge that divide a little bit. So you don't have, you're going to have, we'll continue to have distinct neighborhoods, but it'll be more, feel like more of it's one community. And and we should be able to, instead of having a barrier, whether it's the railroad tracks or the highway system, how do you bring those communities together? That's going to be the real challenge. But that's when we talk about it, mobility being an equalizer, that's how you have the opportunity to utilize the systems that are in place, and then what new systems do we need to put in place to move people around? And it's not just dependent on the freeways and the highways that we built.
Thank you, Mike. Next question.
Yes, Phil Sorrentino, humor consultant. When you talk about smart, you talk about your mind. But as beings, we have hearts and souls. Is there anything within your initiatives that you're addressing those issues?
Would you like me to take this one? Yeah. Okay. So the question was about the heart and the soul, and so that's a real challenge that you might not think about. But I am an engineer by trade, but I'm an engineer who has speaking skills, and.
For the record, I want to say I work with a lot of them at the city. They're very talented, so.
My staff will appreciate that. They know what I mean. Yes, there is quite a bit of research going on, and it's called moral algorithms. And moral algorithms are, how do we make the decisions to program the machines to do things for us so that it's done right? Because artificial intelligence doesn't work well for us if it's not making decisions that are in keeping with what we as a society would want to happen. And there are designs of experiment that actually talk about how does it make a decision whether to not run over a cat or whether to divert and accidentally hit someone on a sidewalk. And those are very functional, but how does the artificial intelligence decide that people were being delayed and we're constantly missing this one person that gets off the bus and needs a last mile solution? So that is being addressed in research. It's very interesting research, and it's mostly being done by this law school, also human ecology, and they work right along with our scientists and our instructors who are looking at how these things get programmed. So don't worry, the engineers are not in charge of programming everything.
Well, and I would just also add really quickly is that we're talking about people having aspirations and being able to reach them. And that's all about heart and soul. You know, if I'm stuck in my neighborhood and I have no access to jobs, to health care, to food, to good child care, I can't develop myself as a whole person. But if I do, then I can. And that's all about heart and soul, besides just using your brain.
And when I talk to the elected leadership at the city, whether it's mayor, members of city council, they're really interested on how, because technology's changing. How are we going to make sure that the change in technology doesn't create a greater economic disparity? How do we use that to grow the middle class and shrink that economic disparity gap? And that's really that's something I think about every day on working on this, and it's a real concern. So I think there is a lot of heart and soul in our efforts.
Even engineers have soul, right? Given the constraints of time and your busy days, this will be the last question. My apologies to others in the line. The panel will stay on afterwards if you wish to come and speak to us. Last question, please.
Thank you. I'm Erin Gerbeck with Measurement Resources Company. I wanted to follow up on something you mentioned briefly, Mike, about that Columbus was more competitive for this award because of the ability to detail how it will improve lives, but we didn't really talk much specifically about that. I'm just curious, what is the plan for evaluating and understanding how it truly improves lives, and when are those outcomes expected to be achieved?
I'm glad we saved that question for last. And my point was, we recognize there are, specifically, part of our application, we called out the Linden neighborhood, and talked about, that first mile, last mile solution. So some of the projects we're working on is there a multimodal trip planning application that we can put in place? Is there a way that we can also have a common payment system so you can, on that multimodal trip, you make one payment? We are working now through the technical side of that to understand how do we do that. Will we have it completely worked out by the end of 2020? We'll have a good test case in place, and I've talked about our partners. Central Ohio Transit Authority is critical in that, and what they're already doing on their payment system. How do we integrate that and utilize that? Part of the process now we're working through are the performance measurements, and so we can then report that back. So that is still being determined.
I'm being given the signal for one more question. So next questioner, please.
Dean Williams, members of the panel, congratulations. This is a wonderful signature for the city. And I think it's wonderful that you've educated us so much about the non-traditional. So I'm Frank Reed. I'm a lawyer at Frost Brown Todd. I'm privileged to represent the traditional infrastructure. So I'm special counsel to the Columbus Regional Airport Authority, COTA, and ODOT, all of whom are doing wonderful things. But the things that you've all talked about are things that we don't think about in traditional infrastructure. So my question is, what, if any, new businesses do you think have come in the last year because of the wonderful things that you're doing with smart cities? Or what potential do you think we have in the future when people know Columbus, Ohio, my home city, has this smart cities grant?
We're seeing a divergence, or a concurrence between what used to be the IT industry that was just software-based, getting more into the hardware space. And I'll tell you, it's not a perfect marriage. You've got these old American stalwarts who know how to make things, and then you've got these startups that know how to get things out and make fast cash. And we're seeing quite an emergence in the middle where there is need for rapid prototyping and 3D printing and getting things to pre-production prototyping very rapidly. So when I mentioned we have 3 new companies that just need some small incubation space of about 15 people at TRC, we're seeing that happen pretty rapidly, where software meets hardware, and all of a sudden we're trying to build something we've never built before. The same applies, I think, to the infrastructure. You referenced a lot of concrete and asphalt, bridges, roads, sewers, and tents. It's sensing technology. So taking sensory technology and applying it to your infrastructure and making your infrastructure smart. We worked with the city in Indiana that had a EPA findings. I know our city has been through that process before. It's not fun. They had a $60 million solution to a storm sewer, but they figured out how to use their local university. The students developed some sensors. The engineers figured out the hydraulic flow, and they changed the sensors and put in flaps and gaps, and next thing you know they know how to modulate the peak of the storm. And they have a $4 million sensor project that can now hold water in storm sewers temporarily until the storm's over. So those students now commercialized those baffles and those sensors, and they're probably making more money a year than I will make in a lifetime. So all kinds of applications-based manufacturing is something I'm seeing very quickly.
And I could speak to a real specific example. Singularity University announced that they're doing an accelerator here in town, and they're working with AAP, and what they're doing is and they are finding 10 startups that they're going to invest in and put through this challenge and work through that are going to have results in jobs in the future. I mean, so things like that are a direct result of participating and winning the Smart Cities Challenge.
Let me seize the last word here, since that's my prerogative, and note that we have focused rather exclusively on ground transportation from CODA through to TRC. And let me remind you that autonomous vehicles in the air have been around for a long time. The integration of so-called aerial systems, UASs, with civilian airspace is an ongoing issue that all airports and airport authorities are wrestling with. And whether you like it or not, the planes you fly in are autonomous vehicles. And most of the challenges occur when the pilot gets it wrong. So we fly so safely over the last 8 years, 0 casualties in the air because of the autonomous control of the aircraft that take off and land millions of times annually with no human-induced crashes. That's where we want to get on the roads, 0 fatalities. And that's the aim of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed today's forum, and we encourage you to continue the conversation with coffee and cookies. You can view and share today's forum and all of our forums on CTV Columbus Television, on WOSU and PBS affiliates statewide through the Ohio Channel, and anytime on CMC's website via YouTube. And remember to register for the most fun you ever had at an annual meeting online. Let's thank all of our sponsors, BDO, Columbus Regional Airport Authority, CODA, AT&T, Honda, and Battelle. And of course, our speakers, Mike Stevens, Lisa Patt-McDaniel, Joanna Pinkerton, and David B. Williams. And thanks to all of you for being here. See you next week. Thank you. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you.